Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Edgett, and today we have a guest with us. Her name is Alexandra Lysova, and she is going to be talking about abuse and parental alienation and issues related to these matters. We're still having people joining into the broadcast here, so I'll take a little time and just kind of stretch this out. Again, my name is Bill Edgett, and we have Alexandra Lysova here today. She is here at the request of Monique Dietvorst and Parental Alienation Canada, PAC. That is a Facebook group where we are trying to create supports for parents who are suffering abuse, going through divorce or relationships, and having custody issues with their former spouse. So we're trying to create a group, an awareness of how to best deal with these situations so it doesn't affect the family as a whole too much and doesn't end up getting passed on to the children. People keep joining. I'm going to be stretching on here for a little bit. All right. Still putting everyone in. So yes, I'm one of the admins for Parental Alienation Canada, and we also work with CCMF and CAFE, and we are currently using their Zoom room, the resources to conduct this interview with Alexandra Lysova. So I've talked enough. Where everyone is here to hear Ms. Lysova, and I'm happy to turn it over to her so you can share your information with us.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Monique, for inviting me here. Yes, so I'd like to make a presentation on male victimization in intimate relationship and parental alienation. I will share my screen with you.
Okay.
The presentation that I've got. So I hope you can see this. The only thing is, how do I make this? Yeah. Can you see the full screen? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then you can see how I move along the slides, right? Can you see how I move the slides? Or it's still the first slide?
It says background.
Oh,
background.
Yes.
Okay, you see it. Okay, so it's moving.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
good.
I see it.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Yes. I'm an associate professor of criminology at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. And I study male victims in the past 10 years. I've started to look at violence against women and children back in Russia. And when I moved to Canada, I've looked at domestic violence as a much more complex issue. And particularly I looked at men, and it was not easy, and it's still not easy to discuss male victimization, but it's very important to do. So in this presentation today, I'd like to focus on issues of male victims in general, and to discuss parental alienation, since it's a particular interest for this group. However, I have to say right away that I have not studied parental alienation specifically. I haven't focused on this topic. So I don't have specifically empirical data to report on that. And of course, I would wish to have more information on how to help parents who are in this situation to deal with these issues. I think that's what probably this group would love to hear most. I am a researcher. I'm looking at the issues, how we examine them in Canada and in other countries. And I hope that by bringing attention to this issue, bringing attention to the media, of the policymakers, of the politicians, this is where we can see the change. So this is clearly my place here. I do not pretend that I can provide some kind of advice or recommendations on how the best to deal with the situation, but how people in Canada, men in Canada, experience this issue specifically. So a little bit about the background to, in general, men's victimization in the intimate relationship. This is a big problem with, in general, with discussing parental alienation as well. And today I will be referring to this special call provided by the UN to bring information about parental alienation, and you will see how gendered this information is. So when people and professionals think about about intimate partner violence, or intimate IPV is for intimate partner violence, it's primarily about thinking that the men are perpetrators and women are victims. And even then, people are informed that men and women experience violence in the very similar ways and in the similar rates. There is still an issue that there is something different for women. So even when this happens, the individuals, general public, professionals still think that female probably are more likely to suffer more than male victims, and also that somehow men are more responsible for what happens to them. So this is, in general, the issues and biases we struggle with when we discuss men's victimization. So let me first see myself. Okay, and then I will just see myself on the screen. Just give me a minute. So in terms of the type of intimate partner violence, and why I'm discussing this, because many of these forms that are listed here very much constitute parental alienated behaviors. So men experience all range of violence in some ways, in similar ways, and also in different ways from women. So men become victims of physical violence, and also in relationship of the parental alienation, when the men are threatened physically, when they actually hurt physically. Men are abused sexually in heterosexual relationship as well as in same-sex couples. Men experience psychological aggression in different forms, being humiliated in the presence of their children, being controlled. So the control and abuse you can see there, when their partners control who they talk to, where they go, who they communicate with, checking their emails secretly, getting access to their accounts. And it often happens in the context of the parental alienation as well. Financial abuse is when another partner threatens the financial well-being of men. And legal and administrative abuse. I think you might have heard about this form of abuse. It's a relatively recent form of abuse with the focus on when one partner threatens or actually uses administrative resources against another partner. So all these forms men experience in the relationship. Why I think it's very important to talk about this, because even today, many people in the general public, many policymakers still do not think this is the case. So it's very important to really talk about this. The problem, I think, that happens in the field of men's victimization in general and parental alienation when the men are targeted parents is that there is this confusion about, are actually men victims of abuse? Can they be victims of abuse? And I think this confusion comes from the existence of two very different sources of data on men's victimization. One is the police data, and this is the official police data on male victims of domestic violence in Canada. And another, what we call self-reported victimization rates conducted by Statistics Canada. It's called General Social Survey on Victimization, or briefly GSS. So these two sources of information in Canada creates this confusion and are used differently by different groups. For example, gender-based researchers most likely use only the source on the left, only the police data, in order to show that women are primarily victims of abuse, while those who argue that men are victims are likely to use the General Social Survey on Victimization. So I will show you a little bit the data that are produced by these two sources. So look at the police data. And this is the most recent police reported intimate partner violence in Canada in 2018, just in 1 year. You can see on the left side right here, IPV. So these are the cases reported by the police in Canada just in 1 year. So over 78,000 of cases were reported where the victims of intimate partner violence were women, and around a bit over 20,000 cases were men. So you can see the clear overrepresentation of female victims, women as female victims of intimate partner violence. So men represent around 20% of the victims. And again, these statistics very much allows gendered researchers to say that we have to focus on women, and whatever women's issues in the relationship, including parental alienation, should be focused on first. And men are just not that much there, even though I would like to just really bring your attention to these statistics that even according to the police data, 20,000 cases a year in Canada, this in the police reported data. So, and these are the cases, very serious cases. It's an assault, it's a threat with homicide. So it's a very serious incident. And then the problem with this type of statistics is on this picture. You can see that these numbers that I show you here basically represent only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of the cases of domestic violence in Canadian families are not reported to the police. According to the General Social Survey on Victimization, 80% of victims of intimate partner violence never reported their incidents to the police. So this is a problem. So what we look at, we see only this tip of the iceberg here. We don't really see the majority of the crimes that, in fact, are happening in the families, but for different reasons. Men particularly, and women less likely, but still also do not report the incidents to the police. Again, so it's very important to keep in mind this important challenge in the way of how the data is collected, and when it's used, this data is used, we need to understand the limitations of this data. And now let's look at the General Social Survey on Victimization, and this is a population survey. How is it done? Statistics Canada agents called randomly households in Canada, and around 30,000 of them. And based on the responses, they would generalize the responses to the entire Canadian population. So you can see the study was done consistently from 1999, and then every 5 years until the recent one in 2019. So we have very important information about intimate partner violence in the past 20 years. What is also important here is that this data does not suffer as much from underreporting as police data, because this is confidential data. People anonymously report their abuse, and their names never show up in any statistics, and they're actually willing to acknowledge that some forms of behavior happen to them. The questions they are asked, not like, have you been a victim of abuse? No, because many people would not call themselves victims. So they probably say no, even though they were hit in the head with something hard. So the questions are asked, is your partner ever kicked you? Or if your partner ever threw anything at you that could hurt? And if the people say yes to these questions, we would see them call them as if they suffered from abuse, so they seen as victims of the intimate partner violence. And you can see from there that the prevalence rates are very close. It's very different from the police data. So you can see that in 1999, the overall rate of domestic intimate partner violence is just between two partners in heterosexual and same-sex couples, mostly heterosexual couples. So you see that the rate was around between 7 and 8, with women being more likely to be affected by victimizations. Little star indicates that here. But then there was a decline. Until recently, it's still kind of declining. What is interesting that the rates of victimization between men and women were nearly equal in 2009. And then in 2014, in Canada, to my understanding, this is the only country we know at this point where male victimization exceeded the female victimization in the national and the federal study. So 4.2% of men versus 3.5% of women experienced intimate partner violence. So that translates to around 400,000 men in Canada who experienced violence in the previous 5 years. Then in the most recent cycle, you can see that the trend has reversed. We don't know why, because for the first time they used the online survey. We don't know if that has some role to play in it. But the point is that what we see is that the rates are still kind of similar, much more similar than in police data. So men can be victims of abuse. In terms of which source to use, it's important to use both sources of information, to both police data and acknowledge the limitation of the data, but at the same time, use these statistics, because that's probably most likely to reflect how men's victimization is presented in Canada. So what is also important for understanding parental alienation is a complexity of abuse. So it's not only men abusing women, as feminist researchers usually present, and it's not only women abusing men, and it's mostly bidirectional violence. So when we look at the most recent, at the most complete review of the studies on bidirectionality of abuse. Bidirectionality means that in one couple, both men and women are abused or can be victims or perpetrators. And what we see is that the majority of the couples where violence happened, in 58% of couples, it has a bidirectional pattern of abuse. It means that men and women both may be victims and perpetrators. And then what is interesting, that the next prevalent type is actually when women only are perpetrators in about 28% of all couples in that meta-analysis study. And then only male perpetrators in 14% of couples. So this is really interesting. This is very different from what we hear from the gender-based researchers who are constantly focusing on this type of abuse, which is least likely to be present in the population, in the general population. And again, think about case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, that somehow this case, high-profile case, illustrated the point that violence is very much bidirectional. And this superstar, A-list Hollywood actor, can also be a victim of such horrendous abuse as he was. In terms of the children, and this is where we will talk more about the parental alienation, something that came up in the study that I did with my colleagues when we talked to male victims of domestic violence, and most of the men I talked to report parental alienating behaviors of their partners. And you will recognize in some of these quotes that I present that what they reported to us. So first of all, men reported about abuse in front of children. So for example, Rob, all the names are anonymized, so they do not reflect on any real names of these people. The kids are really the Achilles heel. I never felt that she was able to penetrate my armor until the kid came along, and she was able to embarrass me, humiliate me in front of my own child. And that is when I really began to suffer. So this is many men really, this is them that we identified, and we just illustrated with this specific quote. So the men feel it's an Achilles heel. Use of children to abuse men. Peter, she was just denied all contact with the children on a whim, just using them as weapons. I can't see them on Father's Day, talk to them on the phone, you name it. Another theme that we found in our talks with men who experienced abuse in the intimate relationship was parental alienation. She took her daughter and was separated with false claims of domestic violence, and we will talk a little bit about false claims. Eye-opener to abuse. Mark, I don't feel like a survivor, which is a politically correct victim. It's interesting that men who experienced abuse don't like to call themselves victims. But when you are in the fight for your children, you adopt the template that they are using against you, and you have to start to understand that you are a victim. So it's very interesting how men try to explain to themselves what they experience and how they will call themselves in these cases. Battle in the courts. Andrew, in spite of her history of abuse and documented records from the Children's Aid Society of beatings of the children, the court still awarded our youngest daughter to the mother. So clearly issue that the courts are very biased against male victims and their children. Some even call it a gendered enterprise. Criminal justice system as a gender enterprise. For example, Meek, everything that she had accused me of doing for the criminal court that I was acquitted of, she admitted to doing to me herself. I still couldn't actually go back to my house and see my children. Despite the truth there, it's very hard for men to reach to get this picture out in and get the fair treatment. Cold shoulder to male victims. Damien, I tried to get some help for the children because she was severely abusing the children. And the police just didn't believe me. They couldn't care less what I said. Again and again, we hear the concern that the men are not treated seriously. They are the criminal justice system officials using the double standard, and they trained, or they in some ways learn to treat men as perpetrators and women as victims. And last themes that we identified in our conversations with the men who experienced abuse: men tolerating abuse for the sake of children. This is really important, that I found why abuse actually goes on, and men are likely to experience more violence in the current relationship, ongoing relationship, rather than in the prior relationship. So Martin, basically I just kept it within the family unit. I did what I thought would be best to try to solve it, to work hard. I wanted to protect the children. Some of these men told us, what would happen to children if I left? I need to be here. I know I will be abused, but I will protect my children as much as I can. False allegations and threats to take children away. Thomas, she kept threatening. She said, all I have to do is call the police and tell them that you've done this, that or the other, and you'll never see the children again. You'll lose the house and you'll just have to pay for everything. So this is the form of the legal and administrative abuse that I will discuss a little bit below. Lack of service for men with children is another big problem. It's just that men have nowhere to turn. Meek, there was a point where I was witnessing my children being physically abused by their mother, and there was nowhere for me to go. There is not a shelter for an abused man and his children anywhere in the country. So this is some of the themes. And again, my colleagues and I, we decided to talk to men to identify all these important topics and bring attention to how men conceptualize, how they explain the experiences and record them, and also hopelessness and helplessness. Chris, if you have children, you can't escape. So a little bit more about the legal and administrative abuse, since it's so closely related to parental alienation, and it's in fact one of the forms of the parental alienating behaviors, using false accusations. So legal administrative abuse, when partner uses the legal and administrative system, criminal justice system, family courts, child protective services against another partner. And prominent examples are false allegations of abuse of themselves or their children, physical or sexual abuse of children, hoping to get custody of children and get some kind of benefits from this. And what is important is that it looks like legal and administrative abuse is something that represents the unique experiences of victimization for men, mostly as victims, and women as perpetrators. And the most recent study and the most comprehensive study we know of was done in the United States in 2020. YouGov survey surveyed a large sample of American population, and it's a representative sample. And what they found was that 8% of Americans, which translated to around 20 million Americans, reported that they actually been falsely accused of domestic violence, child abuse, and some other forms of abuse. But look at the distribution by gender. Men were twice more likely to be reporting that they were falsely accused by their partner than women were. So 11% of men versus 6% of women. And in these cases, about 2/3 of all accusers were women. And in about 1/3 of all cases of false accusation, it was made in the context of a child custody dispute. So this is a really big area of using false accusations. So this is another result of another study by my colleagues from the United States, Denise Hines and Emily Douglas. They collected a large sample of male victims of intimate partner violence, 302 people in the United States, and these men reported very large numbers of legal and administrative abuse and false accusations. So about 2/3 of these men reported partner falsely accused him of hitting or beating her. So that could also be used in court in cases fighting for custody of children. In 38% of men said that partner filed a restraining order against him under false pretenses. And then in about 1/3 of the cases, partner falsely accused him of physically abusing the children. And around 11% said that actually partner falsely accused them of sexually abusing the children. So it's not small numbers at all in this sample of male victims. And these male victims were not selected based on the victimization from legal and administrative abuse. These are just men who experienced some type of violence or abuse in the relationship, but look at the very high numbers of what men actually reported. And it's been back in 2010. So what are the consequences of legal administrative abuse? Again, and in general forms of abuse, that's another argument that gendered activists and researchers use. They say, okay, let's acknowledge that men can experience violence and victimization, but they don't suffer that much as women do. So when we look at the numbers, we see that men suffer a lot, and very serious consequences are there from this abuse. Emotional consequences, short-term and long-term consequences, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and many issues related to cognitive impairment and loss of sleep, and many situations. Consequences for the children who are involved in these situations. Among children of male victims of intimate partner violence and those who were victims of legal administrative abuse, children experience a range of highly negative symptoms, affective symptoms, anxiety, depression, somatic symptoms, conduct problems, and it's all been after being controlled for all other potential risk factors for abuse. And now let's talk a little bit about parental alienation directly. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not directly the topic of my research, but it's something that is our male participants with whom we talked reported to us. So what is parental alienation? And I provide two definitions here. So one is a long-term use, intentional use of a variety of aggressive behaviors to harm the relationship between their child and another partner, or also hurt the other partner directly because of their relationship with the child. And this is Harman and her colleagues provided this definition. Again, this hurts intentionally the relationship between the child and another partner, and also directly the partner. It also can refer to a child's reluctance or refusal to have a relationship with a parent for illogical, untrue, or exaggerated reasons. What is important to understand that there are very many negative consequences for children, which leads to some of the researchers to argue that parental alienation is a form of family violence and should be seen like this one, requiring special methods of addressing this type of violence, and most of all, when the population should be informed about this form of violence. It's not easy. This is where the problem starts, and we will look at the UN call and see where the tensions and resistance comes from to seeing parental alienation as a form of family violence. What is clear is that it very often happens in the families that are divorcing families that litigate in child custody disputes. The statistics that is available is that around a third of children from divorced homes are being alienated from parent to some extent. So it's a very large number of children who are affected by this, particularly in divorcing families. And then just some examples where how parental alienation was recognized. So CEDV, or children's exposure to domestic violence, has been seen as a serious form of child abuse. And it's only in 24 states in the United States it was really seen as a serious form of child abuse. And some of these behaviors are really parental alienated behaviors. So it's very important that there is some kind of a beginning, but it's far from really acknowledging parental alienation as an issue yet. Child affected by parental relationship distress was also appeared in the most recent edition of the Diagnostical Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, DSM-5. And it looks like there are some countries that actually made first steps in recognizing a parental alienation as illegal. Australia, in 1975, recognized parental alienation as a form of family violence that causes harm to children. And Brazil, in 2010, explicitly labeled these forms of behavior as moral abuse against the child. And you see at least some of the forms that they show as illustrate the forms of parental alienating behaviors. For example, discredit the targeted parent, undermine another parent's authority, prevention of contact or visitation between the child and another partner, parent, hiding personal information about the child, for example, school or medical records, from the targeted parent, and then blame the targeted parent for not taking care of these children's needs, making false claims of abuse, changing the residence or contact information without notifying the targeted parent. So these are some of the examples of how it actually can be done. So, and then I was called to reflect on this recent call from UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, called for inputs, custody cases, violence against women, and violence against children. So what is important is just to look at the purpose and the goal of this report. And this is where I cite the purpose of the report: to inform the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls report on the nexus between custody and guardianship cases, violence against women and violence against children, with a focus on the abuse of the concept of parental alienation and related or similar context. I highlighted focus on violence against women and girls, and also the abuse of the concept of parental alienation. So what concerns me in this purpose and this report is that the purpose itself defines what they intend to find. It's exactly what they need to see. So it means that most likely we'll find that, and they will report on that, rather than creating the purpose that will call for the studies to identify all these different aspects of family violence and parental alienation. Within the purpose, they already focus on the abuse of the concept. Again, rather than objectively studying the concept in the first place, there is a clear purpose to find how it's been abused. And this is the goal of this report: to examine the ways in which family courts in different world regions refer to parental alienation or similar concept in custody cases, and how this may lead to double victimization of victims of domestic violence and abuse. It also aims to document the many ways in which family courts ignore the history and existence of domestic and family violence and abuse in the context of custody cases, as well as their grave consequences on mothers and their children. And again, within the goal of this report, we can see that the focus on finding the double victimization and ignoring the history of existence refers primarily in relation to the female victims of abuse and their children. It is something that is a very gendered call, and it is not the first time when we see that the call for the feedback or for input is done in a very gendered way. It's very unfortunate, because this agency is not going to learn any more than they know at that time. It's basically defining what they want to know from the beginning. And we unfortunately see these examples in Canada as well. For example, the Wage or Women and Gender Equality Canada recently made a call for proposals to study gender-based violence. However, in two calls that were issued, male victims are clearly, explicitly excluded from the potential samples that could be studied. And then again, it is something that very unfortunate, because without getting the information, without comparing cases, or when women and men are perpetrators and victims of these specific practices, we cannot see the full picture. So I'm very critical of these type of calls that limit our knowledge and just contribute to very one-sided story. So key takeaways from what I've reported today is there is an overwhelming majority of men who told us about the parental alienating forms experienced in the relationship, and also legal administrative abuse, victimization. We know that false accusations are quite successful, just because the entire system, criminal justice system, is how the man called it, gendered enterprise, is based on the idea that men are the perpetrators and women are victims. So the court official, judges, police officers, the entire system from the beginning to the end, very much serve the purposes of female, more likely to serve women, female victims, as we can see from this call for inputs. It's very important to continue with the education of the general public and also members of the criminal justice system on the full picture of intimate partner violence, to acknowledge that men can also be victims of abuse, and that the numbers are very high of men who suffer from abuse, and also there are very different types of abuse that men experience. In terms of the prevention and intervention, what to do about this, education is very important. Education for children, for adolescents, and education for the mass media. I think it's very important to have more stories in the news about cases when men become victims of false allegations, when men are becoming the targeted parent in parental alienation. I talked to many people who told me that they can't just imagine the situation when the man can be a victim, or then they ask, but why can't they just deal with this somehow? And to my question, how, they couldn't really say. So it's much ignorance about this issue, and also the resistance, as you can see from this call, to focus on just one-sided part of the story. Both men and women can be perpetrators of parental alienation, and both men and women can be victims of parental alienating behaviors. But it's very important to really learn that in a full comprehensive way, rather than to just focus originally on one side of the story and get data only about this. Clinical interventions to address child abuse. Parental alienation is a form of child abuse. Children suffer a lot, immensely. So it's very important to provide help and support for children in this situation. Some argue that systematic family therapy can be particularly important. So it's not only when the perpetrator and the child are treated, but also the victims and the victim, a targeted parent, become part of the system after considerable screening to see if there is no harm can be done by the systematic family therapy or family therapy systems. And of course, judicial administrative interventions. It's very important that the courts are very specific on their orders, on the expectations for families, co-parenting time, clear boundaries for the alienating parent. And I think the issue is that the challenge that the judicial administrative personnel need to recognize parental alienation as a serious issue. They need to be trained how to recognize different types of parental alienation and to acknowledge that both men and women can become victims of this and perpetrators of that. They also need to be educated about this and act on it. So thank you. This is something that I wanted to say. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to hear them.
Okay, Alexandra, thank you so much. That presentation was amazing. I don't know how you condensed so much information in that short period of time. And you know a great deal about the field of parental alienation. I'd like to ask one question that I think everyone would like to know is how come when it comes to parental alienation and alienation statistics, most experts report that alienation happens equally, roughly 50-50 between men and women, are about equally likely to alienate their child against the other parent. But when it comes to domestic violence, it's overwhelmingly men that are not getting help and not reporting or getting any resources to help them. It seems there's a big discrepancy between those two numbers. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because of the involvement of children. When children are involved in parental alienation, this is where people really think a little bit out of the box, and they are more serious about the consequences of the abuse for children. So these ideological wars are still there, but it's less likely to happen when the children are involved. While when we talk about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, specifically when only male and female partners are involved, this is where, unfortunately, these biases are all involved, and police statistics primarily is used that shows the clear prevalence of women as victims of intimate partner violence.
Well, thank you, and sorry for jumping in and everyone else. That one really caught my attention, the difference in the statistics and the numbers. So Wes Helmuth, he had a question there about your resources. Wes, you can go ahead and turn your mic on and ask Alexandra there.
Yes, thanks again, Alexandra, for that great presentation. Yes, I've responded to the UN call for information, and I've used some of your information. I'm just wondering if you could tell us where's the best, what are the best sources for this information? Is there a list or something, or can we get the sources or the presentation or something like that?
Yes, thank you. The area of studying parental alienation is growing, has been growing recently. I'm glad to see so many papers recently issued on this topic. Harmon and her colleagues publish a lot. So I think one of the breakthroughs in discussing parental alienation in the prominent psychological journal was the paper 2018 in the Psychology Bulletin. So this is the highly valuable journal, highly rated journal in psychology. And it published a piece so the paper called, where is it? I have the reference for this. It's a parental alienating behaviors as a form of family violence. So this is really important because I think this is a main breakthrough. I would suggest that you look into this paper, and it's a review paper. So they review all kind of studies. And honestly, again, I haven't done much research on parental alienation directly, but I was impressed with how much studies was done in this area in the 80s and 90s. And they attempt to link parental alienation with child abuse, with intimate partner violence, as a form of family violence. So they show all these negative consequences about something we kind of knew, but we never really called it that way. So I think this is one of the major sources, and then there is more. And if you would like to get something more, you can just email me. I can find some of the list of the sources to send it to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now Derek Lewis, he also had a question. He was mentioning about a Fitbit and a father that was wearing this and his heart rate. So if you'd like to put your mic on and ask the question. Let's see. Derek Lewis.
Hi there. It wasn't really a question, it was just a statement. I was with a friend, and I volunteer, having been a survivor of these issues, still going through it. It'll be 5 years in legal action since I left the house, experienced all this violence. So I was with another man who is a friend. I'm just helping him coach through this. And he showed me an image of his Fitbit, and it showed his heart rate from a moment where he was assaulted by his wife on New Year's Eve, went to bed a little early, and she sexually assaulted him, essentially. And it shows his heart rate shifting, and it goes through her violence. She's got a bunch of psychological issues. So she was kneed the wall. So there's, this is the day she put a hole in the wall with her knee. And then later, this is when the police came over and they arrested him. Mm-hmm. And it shows his heart rate going straight up like a rocket. And he's a fit man. So it went from around the 50s to all the way up to 85. And you can see it fluctuating. Mm-hmm. It's just shocking. So it's a tremendous cost. I was diagnosed with diabetes, and I never had a sweet tooth or bad eating habits. I talked to my doctor, and she said, stress can do that. Mm-hmm. Extreme stress can turn you into a diabetic. And so it's, is there any work being done, or, is maybe the health detriments around this another avenue to get funding for research? Because it's massive, because so many men are killing themselves. I wonder if you could talk about if you've come across health impact.
Oh, yes, thank you, Derek. And I'm very sad to hear these stories, but it's true. This is reality. Yes, it's probably avenue. We're trying to use this avenue, and you see what I'm saying. We try to use the avenue. It's almost we strategize because we can't directly talk about male victims. It's just not the topic that is easily funded by the federal agencies and not clearly discussed. This is just such a shame. Yes, and I'm actually just being contacted by a researcher who wants to study how parental alienation cases and some other forms of abuse contribute to the suicide rate of men in Canada. So that's another big issue just mentioned here. So it's a tremendous toll on men's health. It's a lower expectancy of life in men. It's a tremendous rate of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, suicide attempts, substance use. It is there. We know that, and there are some studies that actually show in the link. I think it's at this point we deal with the resistance to simply look at the family violence as a family issue. We still very much look at it as the fight between the genders, between the sexes, men against women, women against men, and that's very unfortunate because in this ideological war, actually people suffer and die earlier. And children suffer. So I think this is the avenue we take. We bring attention to children because children become weapon of war in these cases. They suffer, and then of course they initiate the cycle of abuse because these children grow up and they will be more likely to be affected by abuse in their relationship. That's the first one. And mental health of men and suicide rate, which is 3 times more than women. And I'm very glad that very recently Statistics Canada, just in January, for the first time I've seen they actually have done the report on men's and boys' violent victimization in Canada. Yes, I have this report if you want to get a link, or you can just Google it. So it's men's victimization, violent victimization of men and boys in Canada. So it's 2023 in January. And again, it's mostly about homicide, which men suffer unprecedented ways. It's not that much about specifically intimate partner violence, but at least to bring attention to men as victims of assault and abuse, right, at the unprecedented level compared to women. So I praise them. I send an email saying, thank you, great job, important step. So yes, thank you, Derek. We're doing what we can, and this is definitely the avenue to go forward. Yeah.
Alexandra, thank you for mentioning that that new study. I wasn't aware of that, and I'm sure a lot of people will be very interested in that. I believe Monique had something she wanted to make a comment here. Monique, is there something you wanted to say? Or
yeah, first of all, Alexandra, can you drop a link in the chat of that study you just brought up and any contact information for you so people can get a hold of you afterwards if you just dump it in the chat there? Yeah, and also I just wanted to say for sources, the Parental Alienation Study Group is doing some amazing work. They're an international study group, peer-reviewed, that they include the Harmon study and also the old research. But there's been a huge boom in parental alienation research. About 40% of all the research, like evidence-based peer-reviewed research, has happened since 2016. So there's a whole bunch of new information coming out, and the old research from the 80s and 90s is called parental alienation syndrome. So watch out if you see any experts using that syndrome term, because that means that they haven't read the new research, and the new research is much better. So I just want to clarify the two different eras of research, because I would rather us use the new research. So just want to mention that. And we do have a wonderful scholar in Canada that helps me at my Parental Alienation Canada, our group, the PAC group, Dr. Christine Giancarlo. She is our Canadian expert and liaison, and she's a researcher at the Parental Alienation Study Group, and I dumped her email and her book into the chat. But if you want to get a hold of any sources at the PASG, the Parental Alienation Study Group, she is your lady. You should contact her at the email, and she can give you any sources and information that you need at study group.
okay, great. Thank you, Monique, for sharing all that with us. Yeah, the Parental Alienation Study Group, it's a group made up of professionals. They have a Facebook group, and they do have the most current information about parental alienation that is currently being studied. I got a question here. There was Mr. Kelsey Green would like to ask you a question, Alexandra. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Hi, Dr. Lysova. I sort of have two questions. One was I do some volunteer work with suicide prevention in Nova Scotia, and about 79% of the suicides were by men in 2021. It was the highest rate per capita in the country of any province. Is there any research that you have that links intimate partner violence against men to suicide that could be shared or I could look up? And my other question was,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you for this question. Yes, it's not at this point, but this is exactly what I've been contacted by a researcher who just saying, let's study this. We need to look into this. The only thing I want to say, and I will post the link here, there was another study by Health Canada on male suicide rates in Canada, and it was just in the fall 2022. And they mentioned there is one, I will find right now to you, I'll post a link as well. So if you see, there is one link for violent victimization of men and boys, and then the link to the paper of on parental alienation behaviors. And let me put it for you, because this is really important. I think this is more attention right now to suicide issue of men. Mental, so it's called suicide in men in Canada, and so you have it right away. Yeah. And this okay, let me okay, I think this is it. No, I will find the I have it as a file. Okay, but maybe I will answer a question first, and then I will look into this link. So yes, this is a very important link. We believe there is a connection. We just don't know exactly, because it's a very difficult empirically to study this, but we can look at intimate partner violence as a contributing factor. But even that report by Health Canada indicates intimate partner violence there. Just half a page, but it says that it can be a risk factor to suicides in men.
Interesting.
It's there, yes. And then any studies done by Rob Whitney in Quebec. So he's actually just in 2022 published a great paper on looking into the mental health of men. I have some of this. I can actually send you some of these resources. I've just been collecting them for this new study, and it's fascinating. It's growing, and I think we should be very soon there to really show the connection.
Cool. My other question was about bidirectional violence.
Yeah.
Does there tend to be a primary perpetrator of bidirectional violence, or is it more of an equal bidirectional violence?
Bidirectional violence, it's a good question you ask, and it's a very complex question. There are different types of bidirectional violence. In bidirectional violence can be one primary perpetrator and can be the one who responds. And this is what it's called intimate terrorist. It can be man or a woman, and the one who responds to this violence, and sometimes they kill the perpetrator, intimate terrorist. So this is one type of very rare type of relationship, but they're there. This is what we hear in the news mostly about these cases. And of course, mostly about men being intimate terrorists and the women being the victim. But there are cases of when men actually are victims of intimate terrorists, when women are very controlling type, very violent type. But there are also bidirectional couples. When it's called situational couple violence. It's what happens in some couples. It just he hit her, she hits him, and they just scream at each other, and then all fine. So this is what they call couples that go without the coercive control. It's just situational. People are tired, under stress, burden, sex, money, children, everything that is involved in this situation, and they fighting, but then they fine again. The literature looking in the escalation of violence in the relationship, some of them escalate to more serious violence, and for some there is no escalation. So there is so much diversity in the bidirectionality of the couples. So yeah, it's a very broad literature, and we don't, honestly, at this point, we don't really have a good knowledge of all the forms of bidirectional violence. And what we know is that it's very important to screen for the type of violence in the couples when to think about the therapy or the different types of interventions. For example, for couples where it's just bidirectional situational violence, just couple therapy may work actually. When there is, or in the couples when there is one partner is clearly violent and controlling, it's more working with the perpetrator first. So that's a good question, but it's a very complex one.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Alexandra. Now, I have one more quick one. Since you mentioned Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, would you consider that one of the situations of a bidirectional terrorist? You said that would that be one of those situations? Would that be an example? I was just curious when you mentioned that.
Yeah, that's a good question. From what I know, and I actually wrote in the conversation the paper on Johnny Depp case and Amber Heard in last year in June. I don't think it's there is a controlling component there. I think it's more situational. They both acted under substance and the effect of the substance use, and it was very chaotic. It looks like none of them has a strategy to control the other one. So it's more just situational bidirectional violence, but that can be quite severe because she cut a tip of his finger, if you remember. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I was just looking for, a possible example, and you highlighted that one earlier as a situation. So I thought I'd just, use that one. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to the presentation of Alexandra Lysova. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Your information, you had so much in such a condensed package, and it was very informative. And again, thank you very much for taking the time to share your information and knowledge with us.
Yes, and just one last thing, because I promised. Sure. I found this report, the last one, for those who are interested in homicide, in suicide information. So that's called Mental Health and Suicide Prevention in Men. And I will just find the link quickly because I have a document itself. I'll send you the link because this is, oh, actually it's right there. Oh yeah, it's actually right. This is the page, copy. Yeah, I think this one site that you can use. Again, this is very important step from Government of Canada. And yeah, I hope you can find it. So they mention abuse. Yeah, and download, and you can download the, no, it's not this one. It's not this one. Wait. It's not this one.
Take your time. Everyone here, I'm sure, is interested in any information you have to share. That's
yeah, the just last one, because it's very important one. Why can't I find it?
Bill, do you have a link to your show that you're going to do with Alexandra in a few weeks? I think you're doing a show too.
Yes.
We have another session with her. You might want to drop a link in if you have it.
I currently don't have it right on me. I have been working with Benjamin Abganti, and he has started a podcast called Dads Matter Too, and he has contacted Alexandra Lysova to take part in one of our podcasts, and she has graciously accepted, and I believe it is
contact you if they want to come to the show.
Yes, if anyone would like to, we broadcast. We have a Facebook channel, or Benjamin does. I help him. He's the one who started the whole Dads Matter Too Facebook group. He has a number of other groups to support fathers, and again, there's the Dads Matter Too YouTube channel where all of our podcasts are shared to when we do them live. So if anyone would like to participate or view that podcast, feel free to contact me if you need it, but it will be broadcast on Dads Matter Too on any of the platforms that they have.
Great, thank you so much. So yes, what I could find was this. I'm not sure why I cannot see the link right away, but this is Mental Health and Suicide Prevention in Men, and this is a suggested citation. So 2022, it was available online. So hopefully on that link you can find it's a 56-page report, very detailed report on prevention of suicide of men in Canada, with all different risk factors, including abuse and violence in the families, and how to work with this. So I think it will be helpful. Yeah. Oh,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, Kelsey. Yeah.
There, great, excellent. So again, thank you very much. So much information, and it was a pleasure to speak with you, and a pleasure to finally meet you and learn about all the work you've done in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and let me know if you have any questions, and have a
All
wonderful
right.
day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Everyone, have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.